Let's get started. Thank you all for joining us. Welcome to another Public Spend Forum webinar. My name is Frank McNally. I'm the Director of Learning and Content, and I'm going to be facilitating our conversation today. And that conversation focuses on emerging technology and specifically how to buy drones. We have got a great panel, and over the next hour, we're going to talk about drone applications in the public sector, best practices for procuring drones, and the regulatory environment today and into the future. Now, before we dive in, I want to ask if you're unmuted in the audience out there, please consider keeping your microphone on mute unless you have a question. We do want to hear from you. So we're going to have some fun today. We have three primary goals for this webinar, but also for the series of webinars we're going to do around emerging technology, specifically drones. Number one, encourage agencies to incorporate drones into their program objectives. Number two, we want to share best practices for people in the public sector on how to buy drones and drones as a service, and talk about some of the available vehicles and nationwide contracts that are available to you. And then we want to include the vendor community. We're not going to do that today, but in a subsequent webinar, we're going to bring the vendor community in and kind of have a 360-degree exchange with public procurement professionals and program owners about how we can improve the efficiency of the buying process. What I'm envisioning there is sort of like a reverse industry day style session where vendors can talk to us as buyers and say, look, this is what challenges me in solicitations, or these are requirements I can't quite get around. And I think that'll be a healthy conversation. If you do have ideas for future webinars, we definitely like to hear them. Hop on over to publicspendforum.net and share in our discussion. We have an open thread on drones and how to buy them right now on the platform. So I mentioned earlier we have a great panel. They really are fantastic. These are some people that know more about the drone space, and I want to give them a chance to introduce themselves. So Matt, let's start with you.
Sure. Thank you. My name is Matt Fritzinger. I am a strategic sourcing officer with the Commonwealth of Virginia. I have been in this position for about a year, and before that, I spent 5 years at Christopher Newport University in their procurement department, and I have been working on drones, and I know we're going to talk about it later, but drones as a service, a contract along with NASPO, and some extremely talented folks at different state levels across the country on this contract, and look forward to helping out today.
Thanks, Matt. Mark.
Hi, it's Mark Bathrick. I'm the Director of the Office of Aviation Services for the U.S. Department of the Interior, and I have the pleasure of working here for about 12 years now, and we have the largest drone program in the domestic side of the federal government with about 300 drones, 200 pilots, and all told about 12,000 total flights across 25 different applications. Prior to Interior, I was in the Navy as a Navy test pilot, retiring from there 2 years ago.
Great. So I know we're probably, obviously, people are going to multitask while they're watching this webinar, and that's just fine. But if you are typing or doing anything in the background, please just make sure you're on mute so we can hear everybody loud and clear. Thanks a lot. Rob Eric.
Great. Thanks, Frank. Again, my name is Rob Eric. I'm CEO of Slipstream Strategies based in Washington, D.C. We specialize in strategic government affairs, consulting, and lobbying in the commercial UAS space to help public and private sector clients advance their interests in Washington. And prior to Slipstream, I worked for a major federal relations firm here in DC. My interest in UAS was really sparked when leading the firm's work for a university client that had an unmanned systems program, one of the first in the country. Before that, I worked for nearly a decade in the U.S. Senate, where my policy portfolio included transportation, defense, and appropriations. And I'm very happy to be with you all on today's webinar and look forward to the discussion on this timely topic.
Thank you. And thanks to each one of you. You guys have been instrumental in helping us put this program together. And we've had a lot of really great conversations to date. And I'm excited to share some of those insights with our audience today. So our objectives for this webinar: after viewing, you should be able to recognize the marketplace. And Yanisa, if we can find any live mics that are out there outside of our panels, let's make sure we put those on mute. After the webinar, you will be able to recognize the marketplace for drones in the public sector. And really what I mean there is understanding the verticals, like where you would buy it, market sectors, et cetera. Understanding the types of vendors, not necessarily vendors by name, but the types of vendors that are operating in this space. And we'll definitely talk about some use cases. Then we're going to think about interpreting the regulatory environment. And you won't be able to recite regulations, but you'll know what the relevant regulations are and how they inform your procurement and business decisions. And then hopefully you'll be able to map out at least a basic vision or idea for how you might buy a drone. So those are our three objectives, and I think we can get there. Real quick plug about Public Spend Forum. We are a knowledge network and impact accelerator for public procurement. We provide buyers and suppliers in the government market with best practice standards, market insights, and an expert network that they need to reduce waste, drive inefficiency, and accelerate impact. We have a great community, and we invite you all to join. It is free to join and register at publicspendforum.net. Everybody is welcome. It's a great place to exchange ideas and to read some great content. We have awesome partners, Michigan State, NIGP, the World Bank. All of these people help us make this happen. And especially today's partner, the National Association of State Procurement Officials. They're partnering with us to deliver this webinar. We want to thank them. They're a great organization advancing public procurement through leadership, excellence, and integrity. So thanks to NASPO for your involvement today. All right, let's get into our programming, shall we? So the drone industry, let's talk about some basics of the marketplace. This is actually from a NASPO report from a Tech Next working committee that looked at public uses for UAVs, and we're just going to call those drones today. Some of these applications are not surprising. Um, law enforcement or agriculture or surveying. I want to ask our panel, talk to us a little bit about some of the more unique or non-standard use cases that you've seen in the public sector so far.
So I'll take a stab. This is Mark. So I think, as you say, a lot of these mapping, surveys, inspections are ones we see today, and somewhat limited, kept that way by the current regulatory structure we keep within visual line of sight. Our agency certainly has a vision of doing longer range inspections and working in wildland fire. We also are looking at things like cargo delivery to remote locations, as well as avalanche mitigation using drones, and even search and rescue where you're extracting humans in adverse conditions using drones.
So, I mean, lately with the hurricane season, particularly devastating, and some of the fires we've had out west, drones have been used a lot in um, disaster response and recovery. Is that right?
Yeah, it's Mark. We had drones down in Hurricane Harvey in Texas. We've been on landslides to look for survivors, and also to map out the area to check for stability, and to determine if there's any residual danger. And of course, we use them on wildfires all the time. This year alone, we've used them on dozens of different wildfires in various applications.
Nice. Matt, yesterday in our dry run, you talked about something particularly interesting, and that's using drones to recreate accidents. Could you reshare that anecdote with us?
Absolutely. So I attended a drone seminar earlier this year, and they had brought documentation, information, video of how they reviewed a crime scene. And instead of flying a helicopter overhead to get the pictures and the video of the area to try to recreate the crime scene, they used a drone to do it. And by looking at the skid marks, it was an icy road. They were trying to find where the car went off the road, where maybe it would have landed into a frozen over pond, and they're able to use the drones and the captured data to actually locate within a couple feet where in the pond the car actually crashed. So it was quite amazing to see. Also very sad that a car ended up in a pond. I don't remember what the outcome of the persons involved in the accident were, but it was just amazing that they can use that to do it now.
That's incredible. I mean, so there are some more basic uses, right, of drones, like inspecting cell towers, or even now I'm aware of some drones that can operate indoors and in tight quarters, and you can send drones down into elevator shafts to do inspection, into underwater fuel tanks to monitor levels. I mean, so drones have some really sexy applications, but they also have some pretty standard run-of-the-mill applications too. And we're going to talk a little bit about why and how the market's evolving in that as we sort of move forward. Now, there are, I think, three, I'd say maybe four primary sectors in this drone market. The three that are primary are drone hardware. That's anybody who makes a drone and sells it on the commercial market. Drone software. These are people that create the software that actually makes drones intelligent, robots effectively. Without software, a drone is really just a flying toy. And then drone services. These are people who can actually run missions for you if you don't own the hardware in house. And then this fourth sector is military drones. I can only fathom the crazy things the military is doing with drones right now. A little beyond our scope today, but Matt, is that about right? These three, sort of three and four sectors.
I would say yes. And it seems like people are trying to streamline when they purchase drone hardware with drone software. So they're trying to make that more vertical. To standardize it. Military drones definitely way out there, and drones as a service has a as an industry, drones as a service has an extremely low barrier for entry right now. So you're going to notice companies popping up all over the place to offer their services.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit about how this market is consolidating a little bit in a slide or two. But yeah, this is, I think, primarily when you think about the marketplace, hardware, software, and then as a service. So drones are an emerging technology, and Gartner every year does this hype cycle for emerging technology. They sort of show a new technology entering the scene and sort of rising to this peak of inflated expectations. And with drones, that would be drones doing everything, the network of IoT drone bots in the air monitoring everything, affecting weather patterns, that kind of thing. Gartner's actually shown or seeing that drones have sort of come over that peak and are now falling into a trough of delusionment, which I don't think is alarming. I think that's just a natural leveling before they go into more enlightened standard use cases and then leveling off into a plateau of productivity is sort of the Gartner hype cycle. I'd like my panel sort of to respond to this. Do you think Gartner got it right?
This Mark, I think this is kind of, as you said, Frank, the natural progression. I think part of what you're seeing in the drone world is that a lot of folks are waiting for the regulatory landscape to catch up. That they feel they need to go beyond visual line of sight to be effective, both a bit as a business and agencies. And I would say that um, folks that really understand this industry and what the drones are capable of are taking advantage of the current capabilities to fly commercially within visual line of sight. And there's so much you can do there that I think that the folks that are leveraging that now are moving ahead and staying up high on that curve. And the ones that are waiting are the ones that are kind of in that trough of disillusionment.
I mean, and drones have been around longer than the regulatory environment, right? I mean, and we'll
Mhm.
talk a little bit about this later on, but there was a little bit of a lag there before you could actually start to use drones in a commercial way. I mean, the technology existed well before that. Is that correct, Rob?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's exactly right, Frank. And it's really sort of been this the emergence of the commercial use cases that are helping to drive the regulatory side.
Nice. Well, so with Gartner's sort of entree and where drones are in their hype cycle, we can start to think about growth in this industry, and I think that's important. And some of the research I was performing to put this together, I found a particularly interesting report on the drone sector from a research firm called Skylogic. They cite three misconceptions about the industry. That's how fast it will grow, which sectors will grow, and then which are going to lag. And they're finding in this report a gap between forecasts, i.e., the forecasted growth, and then actual purchase, service, and adoption. This report is available for purchase, and it's linked right there in the slides that we will be sending out after this presentation. So they surveyed 623 businesses about how they were using drones and wanted to find out the most popular ways. The number one business use for drones was aerial photography and video. The number two was surveying and mapping, and I would hazard a guess that the surveying and mapping use case is probably the most prevalent in the public sector right now. And then third is construction. I was surprised that construction was a pretty distant third. Um, Matt or Mark, do you guys see opportunities in the construction space for drones? Do you think that's just a matter of time before public buildings use drones in architecture and whatnot?
But Mark and I were having a conversation today about this, and there's definitely cases, and Mark can elaborate on the ones he shared with me, but there's definitely cases to where construction is a growing area for this, whether it be through inspection, bridge inspection. But for example, in the Commonwealth and in many other states, surveying is considered a function of construction. So
Hmm.
because of that, the services would be procured in the same manner that you would procure construction. And I know that's the case in several states where I'm working with the group I'm working with, but it can be used for a whole lot of inspection purposes, and people are trying to figure that out now. How can they use it? Is it more cost effective? And is there the right company out there to meet our needs and produce the result we want,
And I
or at
think it'll,
least gather
yeah,
the information we're looking to get?
yeah. Well, I was just going to say, sort of piggybacking on that, I think in a lot of cases you might be uh, buying in a public sector program or supporting a program office that's doing construction work, and you might not even know that drones are being used by a prime
Mhm.
subcontractor. I think a lot of times these primes are subcontracting to drone companies to do some of the things that they were required to do. And so, point being, you may have drones supporting your program and not really even know it. Matt, I'm sorry, Mark. You said yesterday in our uh, our dry run that you were seeing the most growth in that sort of mapping and GIS, and even told an interesting story about inspecting federal dams. How are drones helping in that area?
Thanks. Yeah, uh, we're responsible for a lot of the large dams in the Western United States, and to do inspections in a traditional manner, you're putting engineers over the side of the dam and ropes and scaffolding and like, and very dangerous. And so drones have the ability to do it much safer, much more responsive, and with sensors that really give you kind of state of the art data. We're also seeing them. I just make a comment on your point about the primes when you're doing a construction project. We're seeing a lot of the prime contractors now using drones in construction. And what they're using them for is to compare the as-built with the design. I didn't know this, but a large percentage of delays and cost overruns in construction are because the as-built doesn't conform to the design, and you have to make all sorts of on-the-fly adjustments on site if it's going that way. So if you take a picture with a drone, at the end of the day, you can determine if there are changes in how the building, dam, whatever is being actually built, it doesn't conform and may cost you time or money. So we see that as a real benefit for when we're doing construction projects.
Some of these use cases are the ones that I think sound the coolest. I mean, when you're talking about inspecting a federal dam, I mean, do you think that the ability to collect data is easier from a drone as opposed to a human dangling by a rope with sheer terror when they're collecting that data?
I think I can speak for those engineers that go over the side and say that's absolutely true. Plus, we're seeing sensor development, which is part of that hardware, really accelerate, and we're able to determine, in greater detail, the minute changes in the condition of not only dams, but some of the natural features that we're responsible for managing within the Department of the Interior. So we're getting better data, which allows us to make better decisions.
Fantastic. Uh, Here's another interesting trend that uh, from a research group called Drone Industry Insights. That's droneii.com. They have a lot of really great free research and white papers that you can look at if you're interested. But they looked at the landscape of vendors and makers in the drone space, and what they're seeing is a lot of consolidation and partnership. And what they're finding is you have hardware companies, drone manufacturers reaching out to other hardware companies like video camera makers and camera obviously anybody who makes a camera, basically combining hardwares. You also have hardware players partnering with software companies because, again, drones without the ability to engage and interpret data are really just fancy toys. So you have some hardware and software players integrating, but they found the most rapid consolidation in hardware and service. So where you're actually having drone manufacturers creating new business lines where they'll sell you the drone if you want to buy it, but they'll also offer you the service of the drone. So that's a hardware plus a service, and that's where we start to talk about the drones as a service. Rob, I know you're on the government affairs side. Is this sort of what you're seeing in the vendor landscape when you go out to some of these forums and expos that you frequent?
Yeah, it is, Frank, and I think that you sort of captured that major trend. I mean, I think that the consolidation is sort of being driven by the the customer needs sort of becoming more sophisticated, and for the hardware companies and software companies to really get together to provide an integrated solution. And I'd also point out that you've seen sort of major investments by large companies like John Deere and CNH Industrial in drone companies, sort of as a play to make sure that their needs are going to be met from a hardware and a software and a services standpoint. So I would expect that to continue as the industry continues to mature.
You mentioned yesterday too that you're actually seeing commoditization in hardware. Are we reaching a point where, I mean, the actual design of the drone is going to be less important than its function?
To a large extent, I think so. I mean, I think the platform is sort of becoming commoditized, but you also have a lot of manufacturers that sort of the exception to that are manufacturers that are making very sort of specialized equipment, whether it's an articulated arm, a drone with an articulating arm, or a drone that can operate in tight spaces like the one that I think you referenced earlier, Frank. So you do have companies that are specializing, but in terms of a general platform, I think sort of the industry is moving away from that largely being a differentiator, and I think you have seen evidence of that with some big players sort of transitioning and reevaluating their business model. 3DR is one that comes to mind, most recently.
So as the hardware matures, Matt, is this going to get us to a point where you may have, basic drone framework and then more interoperability between, the types of drones you might buy or the type of service that you might obtain?
I think it's going to go right now. I think that drones as a technology is moving so rapidly that you could think it may go that way, but who knows at this point. Drones really is the next frontier when it comes to technology, and your players today may not be your players tomorrow. And that's really the challenge at this point when it comes to the consolidation that's going on, I think, because everyone talks about how cell phones evolve so quickly. The cell phone you buy today, 6 months, it's out of date. Well, that's not the case necessarily anymore with cell phones, but with drones, that absolutely is the case.
Mm-hmm.
And so the hardware you buy today and the interoperability you're looking for between the software, it may go the way of Betamax tomorrow. So you may have bet on the wrong horse in this scenario.
We're going to talk about that too a little bit when we discuss how we're buying them, but that is important. I mean, ultimately you're buying software, and software changes, and so be cognizant of that because the interoperability issue is relevant to anybody who wants to buy or use a drone and the data that comes from it. So, what can drones do for you? This is my favorite part of the webinar because we get to talk about a really neat use case. This is a picture of Devil's Tower in Cook County, Wyoming, I believe. Is it Cook or Crook? Mark, I can't recall.
I think it's correct, but I'll
Yeah,
defer to you, Frank.
I have it written down. Um, so anyway, so Devil's Tower is, as you can tell, pretty much just a straight up vertical rock. It's in Crook County, Wyoming. It was established as a national monument in 1906, which means it's under the purview of the Department of Interior. Devil's Tower offers some of the most challenging climbing in the world. And when it came time for the United States Geological Service to study Devil's Tower, I guess they had a couple of options. Number one would be to send everybody up that mountain, but another one was to possibly use a drone. And ultimately, that's what you guys did. So, Mark, tell us a little bit about this mission here.
Sure. So part of our responsibility is to manage national monuments like Devil's Tower, and part of that responsibility is to check on the condition. A lot of people come to monuments like this to climb and just hike and recreate. And so understanding the condition and how that's changing over time with weather and other factors is important. Traditionally, we would do this with climbers and a very expensive helicopter, and it would take up to 3 weeks to get that done, and upwards of $50,000. Here you can see a picture of a climber on the side as an example. We were able to use a quadcopter 3DR Solo that we own, one of our 300 that we have, and in the matter of days, actually 1/7 that normal time, and at 1/10 that traditional cost, we were able not only to map the entire tower, but to develop using the software available to us a 3D model of Devil's Tower, which was pretty impressive. It gives the scientists the ability to study that in greater detail.
So this individual, this climbing right there, that they're part of the mission. What were they? What were they doing? What was their operation there?
Yeah, so they're actually up there putting in a reference scale bar, so we can then use that to scale a photograph and help with the development of the mosaic and the 3D model.
Very cool. Well, I want to show real quick for everybody what imagery the drone captured, because I think that's just about the best way to really get a sense for the scope of this mission and how much easier it is to do this with a drone than any other conventional means. So we're going to play this video for everybody. Um, it's only a minute and a half, but I think it's worth watching. So who wants to go to Devil's Tower, Crook County, Wyoming? That is so cool. What I like most about that video is how it sort of gives you a perspective for the magnitude of this project and the size of this rock formation. Um, the perspective is incredible. Uh, so that's really cool. And you guys said you developed a 3D model out of this, and you'll be able to use that to pre-plan any rescue operations and identify rock falls, other applications like that.
That's correct.
Yeah, That's really cool. So there's Mark's use case. That's pretty awesome. Now you might be out there thinking, okay, great, I'm convinced, I'm ready to buy a drone, but you'll still probably need to make a business case for it, and that's what we want to talk about real quickly, like why you might want to buy a drone or a drone service, and what differentiates that from anything standard. So this is a, a graphic I pulled down from a person I connected with on LinkedIn who's an industry consultant in unmanned aircraft. His name is Paul Posialik. I got him linked there if you want to connect with him. But he basically adapted one of Peter Drucker's competitive advantage quadrants for drone incorporation. And his sort of testament is, if you can't move the needle on at least one of these levers or one of these dials, then you're probably not going to get the return on that investment, or you're not going to experience the efficiency that you otherwise could. And that's, can you get better quality? Can you get better customer responsiveness? Could you increase innovation or get superior innovation? And will you increase efficiency? Would anybody say that with drones you wouldn't possibly? I mean, is there any dial here that you see unaffected or potentially unaffected by a drone operation?
This is Mark. We see movement on all four of those dials, Frank. Um, and we find drones not necessarily replacing manned aircraft yet, but we see them replacing a lot of what are called traditional means of doing inspection surveys and so on, mapping, that require a lot of people and a lot of planning and coordination. Uh, and so we're getting superior customer responsiveness. We're able to carry better sensors. We're getting superior quality. And of course, drones are much less expensive than putting a lot of people out in the field for a number of days. And as you saw with Devil's Tower, we're able to do things in a much different way and develop products that we've never had available for us. So there's the superior innovation.
Hmm. And this is actually something I pulled. This is your Department of Interior's return on investment equation. I pulled this from one of the presentations you had shared
Yeah,
with me. I mean, this is part of your calculus.
it is. Our decision making is based on science, so better science is important to us. Um, we're gaining savings not just in the operations, but in the procurement, in the training, and part of that savings is because we're not putting people in these dangerous situations, like putting engineers over the side of a dam. And it's much more responsive to take a drone out of a backpack like we did at Devil's Tower than to go down to the airport and contract for a helicopter to do the same work.
Right on. So yes, so the return on investment equation, understanding why you're buying drones, and you're going to build that business case. Make sure there's a purpose there, and I don't think that's going to be hard to identify. Now let's talk about how you would actually go about buying them. Let's say you've got your business case. Let's say you have the perfect application. Where are some of the vehicles that exist today? Matt, you've been working pretty hard on something for the last 6 to 9 months. Tell us about what you've got in the hopper here.
Sure, we have been working, the Commonwealth of Virginia is leading a procurement in conjunction with NASPO on drones as a service. And we're working with 5 other states, I believe it is, and procurement experts from those states. And we've been developing an RFP that will, whose goal is to find contractors who at least have been somewhat vetted to the best of our ability, given how new this industry is, to be able to perform missions for public body persons. Because we understand that not everyone is going to have maybe I'm going to go with Frank level missions.
Hmm.
So not everybody has a Devil's Tower they have to inspect, which could cost thousands upon thousands of dollars. And a good smaller use scenario would be what we did at Christopher Newport University, where we had a conservation concern with an endangered species. They had set up a bird nest on top of a light post at the football stadium. And the question came up, is there a bird in there? Well, there's only 2 ways to figure this out. You rent a crane, put someone up there, hope there's not a bird in there so that you can take the nest down. And if there is a bird in there, maybe startle a bird, get pecked,
Hmm.
generally unpleasant scenarios, or we contract with someone to come, fly overhead real quick, take a few pictures, um, maybe get us a little video to confirm it so that we can bring the crane out and get it down or the lift. And so that we actually did that. Would it have made sense to buy a drone to do it? Well, I guess if we had people who were qualified to do it at CNU, then it could have. However, it's not as simple as buying a drone and throwing it in the air.
Mm.
And that's what we want to make sure people understand is there's a little bit of planning that needs to go involved. It needs to go forward. And if you're going to be using it constantly, and as Mark and the Department of the Interior do, then it makes sense to establish your own program. But if it's not something you're going to be using constantly, then it makes more sense to use it as a service. And our hope is that we will have contractors who will be able to respond to service needs across the U.S. And we're hoping to really lead the way with this. I don't know that there's a national contract out there like it. And if you're interested in participating and getting on the contract as a locality, I would recommend going to NASPO's website once it posts and contacting your state's appropriate NASPO coordinator about this. I don't want to jump in on how that's all done.
Sure. But effectively, I mean, it's so the NASPO Value Point contract that will eventually be awarded will give any level of government the ability to contract with a drone service provider that's been at least somewhat vetted through the selection process and make that sort of a facilitate that, because like that operation you described, that conservation effort to make sure there was the nest was abandoned, like probably only cost a few $100 to do that by drone. And so having a vehicle like this where you can possibly just hit purchase orders against your P card is going to be a lot easier for public sector professionals to access that than to go out to market for something that's probably a little smaller than you would normally go out and compete for. Is that right, Matt?
That's correct. And we're going to do our best to make sure, not do our best, we're going to make sure that all the contractors have their Part 107 from the FAA. So they'll at least have some semblance of commercial responsibility with how they operate and hopefully operate in a manner which is responsible. So there's a lot that our team's been working on. They've done a great job. So I can't give them enough credit for
Nice.
the work they've done. We hope to have the RFP on the streets before the end of the year so that we'll have a contract in place sometime, hopefully early next year.
Fantastic. Thanks, Matt. We're looking forward to that. So obviously here on the screen, anybody can see naspovaluepoint.org. That will be eventually where you can find this contract when it does post. Um, there are other ways to buy too. I mean, so that's like, to my knowledge, the only like national vehicle that's in the hopper. Although I have heard rumors at the federal level that there might be some BPAs that come out. Uh, Mark, your group at DOI can help with this, correct?
Yeah, so I think if you're going to either buy a drone to operate as a fleet asset, or you're going to buy drone services, one of the important things is that you have some aviation expertise because you're going to be responsible for managing this aircraft. And while drones may look like toys on the left there, they are aircraft and can have the same consequences as an aircraft. If you're looking for the data and you don't really have an organization like ours that can manage aviation asset or aviation contract, then we recommend what we call end product contracts. And those are simply contracts that say, I need this service done. This is usually a data request. And you might specify where you want this data, what format you want it in, maybe what resolution, but you don't specify how the contractor is to obtain that data. And when our bureaus go out and do these end product contracts, uh, we find that they often have they award to a drone company, and that drone company is a Part 107 company and is able to go out and do that. And what it does is it allows you to get that capability, get what you're really looking for, that product, without really being forced to manage that aircraft asset. So I think it's a particularly good way for smaller agencies that may not have aviation expertise. they're still looking for the benefit that can be derived from the data that comes from a drone. Simply ask for that data, let the vendor who's Part 107 certified do their thing. Don't get into the management of, fly the drone over here, do that, and don't specify that you're going to use a drone. Let the vendor decide how they're going to obtain the data for you.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about your the end product contracts that you're promoting, and to me, it sounds just like pure performance-based contracting. So,
Mhm.
uh, indicate what your output is. Ultimately, you want a 3D model of a large mountainous structure, or you want aerial pictures, or you want whatever you want, and you're not going to tell the market how best to provide that. You're going to let them be the experts. I always think that's the way to go. Let the experts be the experts, and so our person on the right there, the drone service provider, um, that might be that they, determined that was a much more efficient way to capture whatever it is they needed to capture that day. So that's really cool. We have some of Linda's got an
Yeah.
operational question that I think is relevant to the conversation right now. And let's pop in on something there. No, so Linda's
So, Frank,
asking, yeah,
Frank,
please.
you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. One of the things to piggyback off what Mark just said too is drones as a service means you don't have to maintain the fleet, which means you don't have to figure out if you need a fixed wing or a quadcopter. Do you need what kind of camera attaches best to it and all that other stuff? There's small things, small details that could make or break your mission. And I'm pretty sure Mark would agree with that. If
Yes.
you're doing a bridge inspection, you got to make sure you don't have a bottom mounted camera on a quadcopter because you're not going to get anything. You're going to get
Unless you can
underneath
do
the
that
bridge.
that
You're not
Top
going to get
Gun
the
barrel
bridge.
roll, and I think Mark can teach us how to do that.
Right. Flying invert. I was flying inverted only works so well in the real world, I think. So, but Mark could probably explain more about how that might actually work with a quadcopter. I don't know. This isn't Airwolf, so I'm going to have to refrain from that. But it saves you from having to own all the different equipment for everything you possibly could use.
Absolutely. Yeah, so that's true. If you are going to buy that hardware, I think to Mark and Matt's point, you'll be absolutely sure you know what you're getting yourself into there. So, yep. So, in product contracts, the NASPO Value Point nationwide contract that we've got coming out, and I think I want to get to this operational question. We're gonna have plenty of time for questions at the end, by the way. But Linda's sort of curious about line of sight requirements here. I think one of her original questions was, let's say I'm in one state, can I operate a drone in another state? And technically, no. Mark, you sort of suggested that Part 107 requires line of sight operations, but how far apart really can you be? I mean, what's the tolerance here?
This market it generally depends on, obviously your visibility conditions, how big your drone is, how what it's painted like. But generally, I think if you're doing line of sight, you can command about a 288 acre patch of land.
Hmm.
And that might not seem like a lot, but considering you've never had the ability to get up in the air and do that without a lot more effort, what you found is even with visual line of sight, there's tremendous capability available to agencies that they never had before. So we don't let that visual line of sight become a limitation. Do your 288 acres and move on to the next patch.
Hmm.
And
Fantastic. Yes.
Frank, this is Rob. Just adding a little bit there. So, Mark's correct about the online of sight, and that would be impossible to maintain line of sight between Texas and Florida. But I will just throw out that I've seen a presentation by a company called Cape, CAPE, where they are actually offering sort of remote operation of drones, sort of exactly what Linda was asking about from one state to the other. So I'm not exactly sure how they are achieving that in a compliant way. And this isn't an endorsement, but I'm just throwing it out there because I saw them present at the U.S. Chamber at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and actually meant to go up and learn more about how they were able to do that. But there is a company that is at least claiming to be able to offer services like that, and I think they're targeting public safety uses primarily. But just wanted to throw that out there as one thing that Linda might want to look at.
I mean, technologically speaking, you can remotely operate a drone. I mean, and especially from a military application, right? I mean, there is very long range operations, but commercially speaking, not something that's
Right,
possible right now. So cool, far out.
right,
Um, okay, so I did want to talk. We need to talk about this because the regulatory environment and the rules for operating in a commercial sector are very important when you're thinking about buying drones or drones as a service. And so let's take a look at sort of where we've been and where we're going. Um, I mean, it's about as early as we'd like to go back is 2012, and that was the FAA uh, Modernization and Reform Act of 2012. uh, what we see sort of back in 2012 in a regulatory environment was really about regulating safe operation, safety, privacy, national security. Uh, and then kind of a big gap until 2015, where the FAA came out with some state and local regulations for unmanned aircraft system. Rob, you suggested sort of yesterday that maybe there wasn't enough done in this period, and maybe it was a little bit too studious. Do you think we're moving kind of in the right direction now? And just generally, what's your take on the regulatory environment?
yeah, I do, Frank. I think there's been a lot of progress made since 2012. My comment yesterday was really focused on that period between 2012 and 2016, where you really had a situation in the commercial space where um, the FAA was granting authority sort of on a one-off basis through Section 333 exemptions, which Section 333 ties back to that FAA reauthorization bill in 2012, and the authority that the Secretary of Transportation was given to provide exemptions for the airworthiness certificates. But you had that was sort of the opening of the spigot on the ability to operate commercially. But we really, when you get to 2016 and you had the Part 107 rule, commonly known as the small UAS rule, when that went into effect in 2016, it was really a watershed for commercial UAS operations, and it enabled widespread commercial use without special permission. Um, so, and that also had significance. I mean, the focus has been on the commercial side, but that also had significance for public operators too, because they are able to operate under Part 107 rules, just like a commercial operator. So there's a lot of flexibility in Part 107, but there are limitations, such as operating within the line of sight that we've talked about today, not operating over people, operating during the day, below 400 feet. Uh, so those limits inhibit some of the more complex operations that are considered key to more fully realizing the potential benefits of drones. So um, the FAA has been working on multiple rulemakings to allow expanded operations to become more routine.
Mhm.
But those efforts have really gotten bogged down, primarily due to safety and security concerns. Um, so we're sort of at an impasse over the last couple of months. But to accelerate the work on the regulatory framework for commercial UAS, the president recently directed the Department of Transportation and the FAA to establish a UAS integration pilot program. And so, today's webinar could not be more timely given this new program, because the program really puts state and local and tribal governments at the center of an opportunity to drive the expansion of the commercial UAS regulatory framework by encouraging them in partnership with private sector stakeholders to identify and propose innovative concepts of operations and models of local management for UAS operations that would be subject to FAA oversight. So the FAA is still sort of in control of the airspace, but they're looking for innovative approaches to involve state and local governments in sort of managing the development of these regulations for the industry. So, you know, in a nutshell, the program really represents a major shift by DOT and FAA to involve state and local and tribal governments in this effort to develop a broader national policy regarding commercial drones. And the intention is really to create a number of test beds or labs across the country powered by partnerships between private sector and state and local and tribal governments to push the operational envelope and to be able to gather the data to develop those enabling regulations that'll, frankly, permit the more complex and demand-driven operations while also maintaining safety. So, the program, the way that it's set out now, they are required to select at least 5 applicants to move forward with. But I'm told that DOT officials would like there to be upwards of 100 of these pilots, sort of like little petri dishes of UAS innovation across the country. So it's really an exciting time, and the Federal Register notice, I should add, officially comes out tomorrow, November 8th. So that will start a clock for state and locals to indicate their interest in participating. They'll have 20 days to make that claim.
Fantastic. When that does come out, we will link to it in our open thread on how to buy drones over at publicspendforum.net. But just to put an underline on the sort of regulatory evolution, it seemed like 2012 was all about getting them into the air safely, regulating the use. 2016 kind of opened it up with the Part 107 license to fly, and at that point, anybody with the will and the machinery could operate commercially. Obviously, good and bad situations there. I mean, Part 107 right now, if you're a Part 107 licensed company, I mean, that's just table stakes to operate commercially, as far as I know. And so, Rob, now it seems like with this presidential memorandum, we're moving and have fully moved from safe operation into, okay, what can these actually do for the commercial and public sector? Let's really push the boundaries. Is that about right?
It is. It is. And Frank, I should add too, unless people haven't met their webinar quotas for this week, there's actually the FAA is hosting a webinar I think tomorrow afternoon on the new program, and so I should have done this before the webinar, but I will send you the coordinates for that so that you can include that with the Federal Register notice in case people want to jump onto that webinar and learn more.
Awesome. That's fantastic. Well, we that's sort of the end of our programming today. I'd like to open it up to anyone in the audience with questions for our panelists, or our panelists to ask questions of our audience. That's a new one. Anybody got questions? Like, at the risk of full cacophony, feel free to take your mics off and or chat them in the box, and we'll take one at a time. And while we do, I'm just going to throw up this awesome 3D rendering that my friend Mark put together um, of Devil's Tower. Oh, I see Anissa's got the FAA webinar that she put up in the chat box there. So if you want to register for that FAA webinar, you can.
Thanks to Robert Lamond for sending that to me, by the way.
Oh, great. Well, I certainly won't force anyone to ask questions, but I'll panel any last thoughts for us, things that we didn't cover that we should. Everybody's just spellbound by this incredible 3D rendering, I understand.
I think it was very comprehensive, Frank. Thank you for hosting it.
Absolutely. It's our pleasure. And thank you guys for joining us. Again, we can't do this without you and without our partner, NASPO, National Association of State Procurement Officials. Thanks to everybody for your time, the three of you especially. Like I said, we've talked a good bit about this, and your input has been crucial. And thank you so much to everybody who joined. If there's no questions, we'll go ahead and just ride off and think of some more drone puns. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Frank.